The rust-red nebulae of the Tartarus Shroud bled across the viewport, a wound in the fabric of space where stars went to die. For 30 years, it had been a cradle, a tomb, and a forge for what was left of humanity. And Kaelen knew its currents better than the blood in his own veins. His ship, the Nyx, was a sliver of obsidian reality against the swirling chaos, a ghost designed to haunt the graveyards of fallen empires. It made no sound, bled no heat, and cast no shadow unless it chose to. Today, it chose to be nothing at all. He drifted toward the carcass of the Harbinger of Dawn, a Cathar Dominion dreadnought that had been a tyrant in its day, a conqueror of worlds. Now, it was just another monument to hubris, its spine shattered by a forgotten war, its hull pockmarked by millennia of micrometeoroids. The galaxy had forgotten the Harbinger, just as it had forgotten the species it once tried to exterminate. Forgetting was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Kaelen's gloved fingers danced across a console of cold, dark glass, the light from the holographic interface painting his face in ethereal blues and greens. His features were sharp, honed by a life lived in the margins, and his eyes, a startling gray, held the flat, patient calm of a predator. He wasn't a soldier in the old Terran sense. There was no grand fleet at his back, no anthem sung in his name. He was a reclaimer, a whisper from a past the galaxy had tried to bury, sent to collect the scattered bones of his people. The mission objective pulsed at the corner of his vision: retrieve the chrono anchor. It was a piece of pre-collapse technology, a device the Cathar had ripped from the dying capital ship Sol Invictus during the Battle of Cerberus Gate, the final treacherous act that had shattered the Terran Federation. The official histories, written by the victors, called it the day humanity's primitive grasp on cosmic power finally failed. Kaelen and the others in the Silent Covenant called it the day of the great betrayal. The Cathar, a species of reptilian zealots who saw advanced technology as a divine gift bestowed only upon them, had been humanity's staunchest allies until the very moment their guns had turned on the Terran fleet. They'd boarded the Invictus not for conquest, but for plunder, seeking to claim humanity's greatest secrets as their own holy relics. They took the anchor, a device capable of stabilizing causality within a localized field, and left humanity to burn in the fires of their broken alliances. Entering the wound, Kaelen murmured, his voice a low rasp that the ship's internal sensors barely registered. The Nyx slipped through a massive tear in the Harbinger's flank, a gaping maw of twisted metal and scorched durasteel. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ping of his ship's proximity sensors. Gravity was a fickle memory here. Entire decks floated in a macabre ballet of destruction. He navigated the debris field with instinctual grace, the Nyx moving like a scalpel through a corpse. He was searching for the ship's reliquary, the heavily shielded vault where the Cathar enshrined their most prized technological spoils. To them, the chrono anchor was a trophy, a symbol of their divine mandate. To the Covenant, it was the key to their resurgence. A soft chime drew his attention. "Echo," he said, acknowledging the open channel. A featureless, shifting avatar of silver light materialized beside his command chair. It was his handler, his confessor, the only link he had to the hidden heart of the Covenant. "Report. Reclaimer." The voice was synthetic, genderless, and devoid of any emotion, yet it carried an undeniable weight of authority. "I'm inside the Harbinger," No sign of active patrols or automated defenses. The old beast is as dead as the records claimed. The Cathar do not abandon their holy sites easily. Kaelen, Echo cautioned. Their faith is matched only by their paranoia. Proceed as if you are walking into a trap. I always do, he replied, his gaze never leaving the path ahead. The Nyx was small, barely a corvette by old standards, but its power wasn't in its size. Kaelen guided it to a sealed bulkhead deep within the dreadnought's core, the door marked with the spiraling symbol of the Cathar Dominion. He didn't bother with codes or plasma cutters. Reaching out with his mind, he interfaced with the ship's systems through the neural link woven into his spine. The Nyx was more than a machine. It was an extension of his will. A low thrum vibrated through the deck as a focused gravitational lance, infinitesimally small and precise, projected from the ship's nose. It didn't blast the door. It simply unwrote the molecular bonds holding it together. The thick slab of adamantium dissolved into a cloud of shimmering dust, revealing the reliquary beyond. There, on a pedestal of obsidian, bathed in a soft, internal light, rested the chrono anchor. It was a perfect sphere of swirling, captured space-time, its surface a kaleidoscope of moments that could have been. A testament to a future humanity had been denied. As Kaelen maneuvered the Nyx closer, preparing the containment field to retrieve it, a blaring alarm suddenly shrieked through the dead halls of the Harbinger. Red lights flashed, casting the reliquary in a blood-red glow. A silent proximity trigger, Echo stated calmly. They knew someone would eventually come for it. A patrol is inbound. Prefect Valerius leads them. Kaelen's jaw tightened. Valerius. The name was infamous, even in the Covenant's hidden archives. A Cathar purist, a butcher who had made his name cleansing heretical influences from the outer systems, which usually meant slaughtering any non-Cathar species that showed too much ingenuity. He was a true believer, and that made him infinitely more dangerous than a common pirate. How far? Kaelen asked, his hands already flying across the console, the retrieval sequence accelerating. 3 minutes until they seal the exit. Their ships are Scythe-class interceptors. They are fast, and they are expecting you. Let them come, Kaelen said, a cold fire lighting in his gray eyes. The containment field enveloped the chrono anchor, lifting it gently from its pedestal and drawing it into the Nyx's shielded cargo bay. The moment it was secure, Kaelen spun the ship around, the inertial dampeners groaning as he pushed the vessel to its limits. He shot out of the reliquary just as 3 sleek, predatory ships tore into the dreadnought's interior through other breaches. They were shaped like blades, their hulls a burnished copper, engines flaring with righteous fury. A transmission forced itself onto his main screen. The face of Prefect Valerius filled the display, his reptilian features contorted in a mask of pious rage. His scales were a deep, intimidating crimson, and a ceremonial crest of bone adorned his brow. Abomination, you trespass on sacred ground and defile a holy relic of the Dominion. Surrender the artifact and your pathetic vessel, and your end will be swift. Resist, and we shall purify you with holy fire. Kaelen didn't bother responding. He cut the transmission and slammed his palm on a glowing rune on the console. The Nyx didn't jump to hyperspace. It simply ceased to be. To the Cathar sensors, the ship just vanished from existence. Valerius's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He ordered his ships to scan every spectrum, to flood the area with sensor pulses. They found nothing. Kaelen, However, hadn't gone anywhere. He was floating less than 100 meters from Valerius's flagship, cloaked in a phase-shifted state, momentarily pushed out of the normal dimension. He watched the Cathar ships sweep past him, their energy weapons firing blindly into the debris, incinerating twisted metal in their frustration. He could have slipped away then, his mission complete. But Echo had given him a secondary objective: leave a message. Remind them why they should have been afraid of the dark. With a thought, the Nyx phased back into reality directly behind the trailing interceptor. Before its pilot could even register the new contact, Kaelen activated the grav shear. It wasn't a weapon that fired a projectile. It created a localized distortion, a micro-singularity that lasted for less than a second. The Cathar ship's aft section was suddenly twisted at an impossible 90-degree angle. Its engines snuffed out, its spine broken. The ship didn't explode. It was simply and brutally crippled, left to drift helplessly. The other two ships spun around, their weapons locking on. But the Nyx was already gone, vanishing into its phased cloak once more. Panic began to creep into the Cathar communications. They were being hunted by a ghost, a demon that struck from nowhere. Valerius roared orders, his composure cracking. He commanded his ships to form a defensive circle, their guns pointing outward, waiting for the phantom to reappear. Kaelen obliged. He reappeared above them, dropping a single, tiny drone before phasing out again. The drone attached itself to the hull of Valerius's command ship and emitted a low-frequency pulse. It wasn't an explosive. It was a data spike, burrowing through the Cathar's encrypted networks. On the bridge of Valerius's ship, every screen suddenly went black before lighting up with a single, stark image: the sigil of the Terran Federation, the long-forgotten emblem of a phoenix rising from flames. Below it, a line of text appeared in perfect, mocking Cathar script we remember. Valerius stared, his crimson scales paling. This wasn't the work of pirates or a rival empire. This was something else, something old and unforgiving. Kaelen watched the prefect's reaction on a pirated feed, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. He had the anchor. He had crippled one of their ships, and he had planted a seed of pure, undiluted terror in the heart of their fanatical commander. It was time to leave. As the Nyx turned to exit the shattered dreadnought, the third Cathar pilot, driven by either bravery or sheer terror, made a desperate move. He bypassed his ship's safety protocols, overloading his reactor to create a massive, uncontrolled energy burst, hoping to catch the phased ship in the blast. The wave of raw power washed through the area, and even in its phased state, the Nyx shuddered violently. Alarms blared on Kaelen's console, shielding down to 12%. He gritted out, fighting the controls. Phase drive is destabilizing. The blast caught us mid-shift. For a critical second, the ship flickered back into visible reality, its obsidian hull shimmering like a heat haze. It was just long enough for Valerius. The prefect screamed. Fire, fire, everything! A storm of plasma bolts and kinetic slugs tore through the space where the Nyx had been. Most missed, but one plasma bolt struck the port engine nacelle. The ship screamed, a shriek of tortured metal and failing systems. Kaelen was thrown against his restraints, the world dissolving into a blur of red warning lights and the smell of ozone. He managed to force the phase drive to re-engage, pulling the ship fully out of phase just as another volley arrived. He was clear, but the damage was done. The Nyx was bleeding, leaving a faint trail of quantum residue in its wake, a trail that a hunter as obsessed as Valerius could potentially follow. He pushed the battered ship out of the Harbinger's corpse and into the relative safety of the Tartarus Shroud's dense nebulae. The Cathar ship's too large and too conventional to follow him into the celestial graveyard. Once he was certain he wasn't being pursued, he let out a shaky breath, his knuckles white on the controls. The silver avatar of Echo reappeared, its form steady despite the chaos. "The chrono anchor is secure," Kaelen reported, his voice tight with strain. "But the ship is damaged. And Valerius saw us. He got a clear visual for a moment. He knows a Terran ship is out here. He knows we can fight back." "That was an acceptable risk," Echo replied, its tone unchanging. "The fear you have instilled in him today is as valuable as the anchor itself. It will spread. Doubt will fester in the Dominion." "He'll hunt me," Kaelen stated. It wasn't a question. "He will try," Echo corrected. "But his hunt is no longer our primary concern. The recovery of the anchor has initiated the next phase. The signal has been sent." Kaelen felt a cold dread mix with his adrenaline. The signal. For 30 years. The Silent Covenant had been a ghost, moving unseen. Activating the chrono anchor was a beacon. A declaration to the scattered, hidden remnants of humanity that the time for silence was over. It was also a beacon to their enemies. A challenge whispered across the void. "What's the next target?" "Echo," he asked, already knowing the answer would drag him deeper into the coming storm. The avatar shimmered, and a new set of coordinates appeared on Kaelen's navigation screen, pointing to a system deep within the territory of the Galactic conglomerate, a ruthless corporate state that had built its wealth on Terran slave labor after the collapse. "Our people are still there. Kaelen, held in chattel pens on a world called Cygnus X1. You are not a reclaimer of technology this time." The avatar's light seemed to dim, to harden into something that was almost pity. "You are to be a liberator. This is no longer about revenge, reclaimer. It's about redemption." Kaelen looked from the coordinates to the swirling red clouds of the shroud outside. The galaxy thought humanity was a ghost, a faded memory. They were about to learn that some ghosts carry swords, and the long, quiet night was finally over. The hunt had just begun. But he was no longer the only one hunting. The Nyx was wounded, and Kaelen felt its pain as a dull ache behind his own eyes. Deep within the swirling gases of a nascent star system in the Tartarus Shroud, he guided the ship into the gravity well of a rogue planet, a dead rock adrift in the cosmos, shielded from any long-range scans. Here, in the absolute silence, the work of healing began. The ship's nanite swarms, microscopic machines that were the lifeblood of its regenerative hull, emerged from their reservoirs, flowing like liquid mercury over the gash on the port nacelle. They worked with a silent, tireless intelligence, knitting together the severed arteries of power conduits and sealing the breach in the obsidian black armor. Kaelen sat in the command chair, his mind linked to the ship's diagnostic systems, experiencing the repairs not as a mechanic would, but as a body healing a wound. He felt the flow of energy returning to the damaged sector, the subtle shift in the ship's magnetic field as the phase drive coils were recalibrated. The Nyx wasn't just a vessel, it was a symbiotic partner, grown from a seed of salvaged xenotech and Terran ingenuity in the hidden shipyards of the Covenant. It was his only home, his only confidant. The mission to Cygnus X1 gnawed at him. Reclaiming artifacts was a clean, cold business. It was a matter of stealth, precision, and overwhelming technological superiority against a predictable foe. Liberating people was different. People were messy. They were unpredictable, fragile, and filled with the very emotions the Covenant had taught him to suppress: hope, fear, rage. They were a liability in a galaxy that punished such things. He severed his direct link to the repair process and pulled up the data cache on the Galactic conglomerate. Theirs was an empire not of faith or conquest, but of commerce. They didn't have gods, they had shareholders. They didn't have soldiers, they had security assets. Their cruelty was not born of malice, but of cold, hard calculation. To the conglomerate, a living being was either an asset or liability, a producer or a consumer. After the collapse, the scattered Terran survivors had been classified as an untapped resource. They were rounded up, stripped of their identities, and sold to the highest bidder. Cygnus X1 was the conglomerate's largest human capital processing center, a planet-sized factory where his people were bred, conditioned, and distributed like livestock. The journey there required a new level of caution. Conglomerate space was a web of surveillance nodes, toll gates, and patrol routes, all governed by a central AI that monitored the flow of everything from cargo freighters to stray photons. To them, an unsanctioned ship was not an enemy. It was a discrepancy in the ledger, an anomaly to be audited and, if necessary, liquidated. Kaelen plotted a course through the gaps, through pirate-infested nebulae and unstable hyperspace lanes that the conglomerate's risk-averse algorithms deemed unprofitable to patrol. The Nyx, with its phase drive, could make short, untraceable jumps, stitching together a path through the blind spots. For days, he was a ghost, slipping past the monolithic trade hubs and the glittering corporate arcologies that dotted conglomerate territory. He watched their ships, massive, graceless freighters lumbering between systems, their hulls plastered with garish corporate logos. There was no art to them, no soul. They were simply containers, built for maximum efficiency and minimal cost. When he finally arrived in the Cygnus system, he kept the Nyx cloaked in the shadow of a gas giant's ring system, a silent observer looking down upon the jewel of corporate depravity. Cygnus X1 was not a pretty world. Its atmosphere was a toxic brown haze, a byproduct of unregulated industrial effluvium. The surface was a grid of sprawling factory complexes and habitation blocks, connected by a network of maglev trains that ran with merciless punctuality. At the planet's north pole stood the Spire, a gleaming needle of chrome and glass that pierced the smog-filled sky, the administrative heart of the operation, where beings with names and stock options decided the fate of millions who had neither. Using the Nyx's deep-range sensors, he began his reconnaissance, peeling back the layers of the planet's security. The chattel pens, as Echo had called them, were officially designated as Tier 7 residential blocks. They were grim, utilitarian structures, each housing tens of thousands of Terrans. The perimeter was patrolled by automated enforcer drones, menacing tripedal machines with pulse cannons for arms. The entire complex was blanketed by a low-frequency field designed to suppress strong emotional responses, keeping the population docile and compliant. Apathy was the first chain they forged. He needed eyes on the inside. Echo had provided a name, a whisper in the Covenant's intelligence network, Alara. She was a memory keeper, one of a handful of Terrans who risked recalibration, a euphemism for mind-wiping to secretly preserve the stories and language of old Earth. Finding her would be the key. He couldn't just land the Nyx. The atmospheric sensors would detect the displacement. Instead, he deployed a micro-drone, no larger than a grain of rice, guiding it down through the toxic clouds on a simulated trajectory of a falling micrometeorite. It slipped through the energy fence of Block Gamma 9 and began its search. Through the drone's microscopic lens, Kaelen saw the reality of his people's existence. He saw them in the factories, their movements synchronized and robotic, their faces blank as they assembled consumer electronics for alien markets. He saw them in the communal cafeterias, consuming nutrient paste in silence. He saw the conglomerate's xyloform supervisors, insectoid beings known for their lack of empathy, watching over them with cold, multifaceted eyes. There was no life here, only existence. The drone found Ilara in a hidden alcove in the block's recycling sector, a place the drones rarely swept. She was surrounded by a small group of children, her voice a soft murmur as she spoke to them in a language Kaelen's universal translator identified as an archaic Terran dialect. It was English. She was telling them a story, a fairy tale about a princess and a dragon, her face animated in a way that seemed utterly alien in this world of blank expressions. Kaelen opened a secure, untraceable channel, projecting his voice as a sub-vocal whisper only she could hear. "Ilara, do not react. I am a friend." The woman froze, her story catching in her throat. The children looked at her, confused. Her eyes, a deep, defiant brown, darted around the alcove, searching for the source. She saw nothing. Who is this? Her thoughts were a tight, controlled broadcast, a latent psychic ability the conglomerate must have missed in their screenings. It was how she shielded her stories from the emotional suppression field. "My name is Kaelen. I am a child of Earth. Like you," he sent back, his own mental voice feeling rusty and unused. "I pilot the ship you cannot see in your sky. I am here to offer you a way out." Her mental shields slammed down. "Earth is a myth, a lie the supervisors use to mock us. There are no ships. There is no one coming for us. Leave me alone. Phantom." He had to prove himself. He accessed the block's lighting controls through the drone's connection to the local network. "Look at the lumens above you," he sent. "Count to 3. Her eyes flickered upward. On the third count, he made the lights in the alcove blink twice, a simple, impossible act in a system of total control. The children gasped. Ilara's eyes widened, a flicker of something not hope, but stunned disbelief crossing her face. "How? The conglomerate's control is an illusion," he transmitted. "Humanity is not dead. We have been waiting in the shadows, growing strong. The time for waiting is over. I need your help. Ilara, I can break your chains, but you must be willing to run." He could feel the war raging within her. Decades of conditioning fought against a lifetime of whispered stories. The phantom in her head offered a dream, but the reality of the enforcer drones was just outside the door. "What do you want from me?" she finally sent, her mental voice trembling. "I need to know the layout of the central control hub in this block. I need to know the true number of your people, the location of the infirmaries, the weak points in the drone patrol patterns. I need a leader who can rally them when the time comes. You want me to lead a rebellion. We have nothing. They will slaughter us." They will try," Kaelen countered, his voice hardening. But they are about to have a very bad day. Their system is built on order and predictability. We are going to introduce them to chaos. Their silent conversation was cut short by a new presence. The drone sensors picked up an approaching figure, one that moved with an authority the other xyloforms lacked. It was Director Vorlag, the chief administrator of Cygnus X1. He was a Visian, a species known for their gelatinous, translucent bodies that housed a complex, visible nervous system. He glided on a personal hover platform, his form pulsing with a cold, blue light of intellectual superiority. Vorlag stopped near the alcove, his multifaceted eyes scanning the area. He hadn't detected the drone, but his presence was a chilling reminder of the power they were up against. Unit 734. Vorlag's synthesized voice boomed, addressing Ilara by her designation number. Your narrative dissemination is unscheduled. Report for recalibration at SO 600 tomorrow. Emotional contagion cannot be tolerated. He glided away without another word, the threat hanging in the air. Absolute and unquestionable. Ilara stared after him, the color drained from her face. Recalibration. It was a death sentence for the soul. The dream of freedom had just been crushed by the immediate certainty of oblivion. He knows, she sent to Kaelen, her thoughts laced with despair. He knows I'm a risk. I'm out of time. No, Kaelen replied, his own cold resolve solidifying into a sharp point of rage. He is. He had planned a subtle infiltration, a quiet build-up to liberation. Vorlag had just changed the timetable. This would no longer be a quiet whisper of rebellion. It would be a scream. He pulled the micro-drone back and turned his attention to the director's personal transport. As Vorlag glided back toward the central spire, Kaelen used the Nyx's systems to execute a targeted, high-energy data burst, aimed not at the director, but at every public vid screen in Block Gamma 9. The monotonous corporate propaganda that usually filled the screens flickered and died. For a full 3 seconds, they displayed a stark, high-resolution image captured by the drone Ilara, huddled with the children, her face illuminated by a storyteller's passion. It was an image of pure, unadulterated humanity. Then, the screens went black. It was a simple act, but in a world of absolute control, it was a thunderclap. Across the block, thousands of Terrans stopped their work, their heads lifting from their stations. They had seen it. A face that wasn't blank. An emotion that wasn't apathy. It was a memory. A spark. On his hover platform, Director Vorlag came to a halt, the blue light of his nervous system flashing a furious, chaotic red. Every security alarm in the sector began to howl. He knew, with the cold certainty of a compromised system, that his perfect, orderly machine had just been invaded. He had an anomaly, and in the dark of space above, the anomaly stared down at the enraged director's energy signature, a predator watching its prey. The first shot of the war for Cygnus X1 had been fired, not with a laser or a missile, but with a picture, and Kaelen knew. As the planet below erupted into a state of high alert, that the real battle had just begun. He had given them a symbol. Now, he had to give them a revolution. The chaos Kaelen had seeded on Cygnus X1 grew faster and more virulently than he had anticipated. Director Vorlag, in his cold, corporate fury, had reacted with predictable brutality. He tripled the number of enforcer drones in Block Gamma 9, initiated random sweeps for non-compliant thought patterns, and publicly recalibrated a dozen Terrans in the Central Plaza as a demonstration of his absolute control. But it was too late. The image of Alara had been a stone tossed into a stagnant pond, and the ripples were spreading. Whispers, a currency more valuable than any conglomerate credit, began to circulate through the ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. For the first time in a generation, the Terrans of Cygnus X1 were not just existing, they were communicating. They were remembering. From the silent bridge of the Nyx, Kaelen watched the data streams, a phantom observer in the machine's heart. He had tapped into the planet's entire comms network, and he saw everything. He saw Vorlog's increasingly paranoid memos to his off-world superiors, framing the incident as a minor case of industrial sabotage by a corporate rival. He saw the panicked chatter of the xyloform supervisors who were unequipped to handle a workforce that was suddenly looking them in the eye. Most importantly, he saw the subtle, emerging patterns of resistance. Maintenance crews began accidentally rerouting power from surveillance cameras. Factory assemblers started introducing minute, almost undetectable flaws into the products they were building, creating a supply chain nightmare for the conglomerate. These were small acts of defiance, but they were the beginning of an awakening. His priority, however, was Alara. Vorlag had her confined to an isolation cell deep within the block's security hub, scheduled for recalibration in less than 24 hours. She was the symbol, the spark. He could not let her be extinguished. He needed to get her out. And to do that, he needed to bring a piece of the Nyx planet side. An assault was out of the question. The moment he revealed his ship, the conglomerate would dispatch a fleet, and the Terrans would be caught in the crossfire. He needed a scalpel, not a sword. He spent hours analyzing the planet's atmospheric sensor grid, finding a blind spot, a fleeting, 4-second window created by the orbital transit of a massive cargo hauler. It was just enough time. He took a deep breath, his hands moving with practiced calm over the controls. He wasn't just piloting a ship, he was threading a needle in a hurricane. He brought the Nyx down in a controlled, high-velocity dive, its phase cloak bending the planet's atmosphere around it. For 3.9 seconds, he was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the wind. He deployed his target, a single, coffin-sized stealth pod, its surface coated with the same sensor-defeating material as the Nyx. The pod shot from the ship's belly, using the cargo hauler's massive gravitational wake to mask its descent. By the time the 4-second window closed, the Nyx was already climbing back to the safety of orbit, its presence completely undetected. The pod, guided by Kaelen's remote commands, landed with pinpoint accuracy in the sprawling junkyards that bordered Block Gamma 9, burying itself under a mountain of industrial scrap. Inside the pod was not a weapon, but a toolkit for a revolution, a portable neural interface, a multi-spectrum sensor jammer, a plasma cutter, and a set of adaptive camouflage fatigues, and Kaelen himself. Leaving the Nyx under the command of its own highly advanced AI was a risk, but it was a calculated one. He had to be on the ground, to be the chaos agent himself. He donned the fatigues, the material shimmering and adapting to the grimy textures of the junkyard around him. His face was obscured by a helmet that not only masked his identity, but also fed him a constant stream of tactical data from the Nyx's orbital sensors. He was now a ghost of a different kind, one that walked on solid ground. His first task was to cripple the block's security from the inside. Following the schematics he had downloaded, he navigated the labyrinthine maintenance tunnels beneath the facility. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and recycled chemicals. He moved with a silence that was unnatural, his footsteps making no sound, his presence masked from the internal sensors by the jammer on his back. He was an equation that didn't add up, a variable the system couldn't account for. He reached the primary security nexus, a humming chamber of servers and glowing conduits that controlled the Enforcer drone network. 2 xyloform technicians were monitoring the consoles, their insectoid heads bent in concentration. Kaelen didn't kill them. Death was messy and loud. Instead, he activated a localized stasis field generator, a piece of Covenant tech that froze time in a small bubble. The 2 xyloforms froze mid-motion. Their chittering mandibles paused, their multifaceted eyes staring blankly. They were trapped in a single, silent moment. He walked past them and placed his hand on the central server. The neural interface in his glove synced with the system, and he poured a virus into its core, not a destructive one, but a virus of confusion. It wouldn't shut the drones down. It would rewrite their friend or foe protocols. It would make them see their masters as the enemy. His next target was Ilara's cell. The security hub was on high alert, but their attention was focused outward, on the increasingly restless Terran population. They never expected the threat to come from within. He cut through the wall of her cell with the plasma cutter, the metal melting away with a barely audible hiss. Ilara was huddled in the corner, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a defiant fire. When she saw his helmeted figure step through the newly made door, she didn't scream. She stood up. "You are real," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "More than you know," he replied, his voice modulated by the helmet. "We don't have much time. I'm getting you out of here, but I need you to do something for me first." He handed her a small, flat device. "This is a broadcast amplifier. When I give the signal, I need you to speak to them. Not as Unit 734, as Ilara of Earth. Tell them the story you were telling the children. Tell them about the dragon." She looked at the device, then back at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. It wasn't just an escape. It was a declaration of war. He led her back through the maintenance tunnels, his movements swift and sure. As they neared an exit that led to the central plaza, he paused, holding up a hand. "It's time," he said, his gaze fixed on the tactical display inside his helmet. "They're about to learn what happens when you cage a storm." He sent a single command pulse from his wrist unit. Across the block, the virus he had planted in the security nexus activated. The Enforcer drones, which had been arrayed in intimidating lines to control the growing crowds, suddenly swiveled, their targeting lasers, once aimed at the Terrans, now locked onto the xyloform supervisors. The first shot was fired. A pulse cannon blast tore through a xyloform's thorax, sending it collapsing in a shower of green ichor. Panic erupted. The xyloforms shrieked in confusion and terror as their own security forces turned on them. The Terrans, who had been cowering in fear, froze in stunned disbelief. This was the moment. "Now, Ilara," Kaelen commanded. Ilara raised the amplifier to her lips, her hand trembling, but her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, broadcast from every speaker in the plaza, overriding Vorlog's frantic lockdown commands. "They tell us we are nothing," she began, her voice ringing with a power she never knew she possessed. "They tell us we are units, assets, numbers on a page. But I remember a story of a people who faced a great dragon that hoarded all the light and warmth in the world." As she spoke, Kaelen moved. He was a shadow in the chaos, a predator stalking its prey. He used the confusion to his advantage. His targets not the drones or the low-level supervisors, but the infrastructure of control. He planted microcharges on the generators powering the emotional suppression field. He severed the data links connecting the block to the central spire. He was cutting the head from the snake. In the spire, Director Vorlag watched his control of Block Gamma 9 collapse in real time. His drones were slaughtering his staff. The suppression field was offline, and a single, defiant Terran voice was broadcasting a message of rebellion to a captive audience of millions. He couldn't comprehend it. It was illogical. It was unprofitable. He ordered his personal guard, an elite unit of Visian enforcers, to descend on the block and sterilize the contagion. Back in the plaza, Ilara's story reached its crescendo. And the people, who had lived in darkness for so long, remembered that they too had fire in their hearts. They rose up, not with claws or fury, but with a light of their own. And they reminded the dragon that the sky belongs to everyone. As she finished, a series of explosions rocked the plaza. Kaelen's charges detonated, and the oppressive, dampening weight of the suppression field lifted for the first time in their lives. The Terrans of Block Gamma 9 felt the full, unfiltered flood of their own emotions, decades of repressed anger, grief, and a desperate, terrifying hope surged through them. The stunned silence broke. A single Terran threw a piece of scrap metal at a fleeing xyloform, then another, then 1,000. The rebellion had begun. Kaelen found Ilara in the surging crowd, pulling her into the relative safety of an alleyway. "You did it," he said, his voice holding a trace of something that might have been admiration. "I just told a story," she replied, breathless, her eyes wide with the enormity of what they had just unleashed. "You gave them a reason to fight," he corrected. "Now, we need to give them a way to win." Through his helmet's display, he saw Vorlag's elite guard descending in armored transports. The real fight was just beginning. The conglomerate would not let this world go easily. But as Kaelen looked out at the sea of determined, emotional, beautifully chaotic human faces, he knew the conglomerate had already lost. They had built an empire on the belief that humanity was a resource to be controlled. They had forgotten that humanity, when pushed to the brink, was not a resource. It was a force of nature. The uprising in Block Gamma 9 was not a coordinated military operation. It was a tidal wave of pure, cathartic violence. Terrans who had spent their entire lives in forced servitude, their emotions chemically neutered, were now a raging, untethered force. They armed themselves with whatever they could find: welding torches, scavenged pipes, sharpened pieces of machinery. They moved with a desperate, how fearless energy of a people with nothing left to lose, overwhelming the remaining loyalist security drones and xyloform supervisors through sheer, unrelenting numbers. It was brutal, inefficient, and utterly magnificent. Kaelen, with Ilara in tow, navigated the maelstrom, a ghost moving through the heart of the storm he had created. His objective had shifted from inciting rebellion to shaping it into a survivable conflict. He was no general, but he understood the cold calculus of war. Raw emotion could win a battle, but it couldn't win a war against an enemy like the conglomerate. Vorlag's elite Visian guard arrived like a scalpel intending to excise a tumor. Their transports landed with disciplined precision on the block's main rooftops, and the enforcers descended on grav lifts, their translucent bodies encased in sleek, form-fitting combat armor. They carried sonic pulse rifles, weapons designed not to kill, but to incapacitate through excruciating, nerve-shattering pain. They were corporate assets, sent to quell a labor dispute and protect company property, which included the Terrans themselves. Kaelen watched their tactical deployment through his helmet's link to the Nyx. "They're not trying to kill them," he murmured, pulling Alara behind the cover of an overturned transport vehicle. "They're trying to pacify them. It's cheaper to re-educate than to replace." "So they'll torture them into submission," Alara said, her face grim. She was watching her people charge the Vizian lines, only to collapse in screaming, convulsing heaps as the sonic waves hit them. The rebellion was stalling, its fiery passion turning into a symphony of agony. "Passion isn't enough," Kaelen stated, his voice flat and hard. "We need to change the equation. I need to get to the block's primary communication array. If I can amplify its signal, I can turn this planet into a loudspeaker." "A loudspeaker for what?" Alara asked, clutching a plasma pistol he had given her from the pod. "For the truth," he replied. "The conglomerate operates on a foundation of lies. They present themselves to the galaxy as a benevolent corporate entity. We're going to show everyone what their human capital initiative really looks like." He laid out the plan. Alara, who was fast becoming the voice and face of the rebellion, would rally a contingent of fighters to create a diversion, drawing the Vizians' attention toward the factory sector. Meanwhile, he would make a solo run for the communications tower, a spire of metal and glass that rose from the center of the security hub he had just escaped. It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it. But as Alara looked at the faces of the fighters gathering around her, men and women with fire in their eyes, who now looked to her not as a storyteller, but as a leader, she nodded. "Tell me what you need, Kaelen," she said, her voice steady. He gave her a small, metallic beacon. "When you've drawn their main force, activate this. It will give me a 3-minute window. That's all I'll have." She took it without hesitation. 3 minutes. For Earth. The phrase felt strange on her lips. A relic from a storybook. But it resonated with a power she was just beginning to understand. For humanity, Kaelen corrected softly, before melting back into the shadows. The diversion was a masterpiece of desperation. Alara, using her intimate knowledge of the block's layout, led her fighters through a series of ambushes and feints, striking at the Vizians and then vanishing into the industrial labyrinth. She was a natural strategist. Her mind, once used for memorizing ancient tales, now brilliantly adept at calculating angles of attack and predicting enemy movements. She turned the factory, a place of monotonous labor, into a weapon, using automated cranes to drop heavy cargo on Vizian patrols and overloading plasma forges to create explosive traps. The Vizian commander, a being named Krelix, whose nervous system pulsed with irritated violet light, grew increasingly frustrated. This wasn't a riot. It was a coordinated insurgency. He diverted the bulk of his forces to the factory sector, determined to corner and crush this unexpected resistance. From a high vantage point, Alara saw the Vizian lines shift. She took a deep breath, raised the beacon, and pressed the activation switch. Miles away, a timer began to count down inside Kaelen's helmet. 3 minutes. He burst from cover, his movements a blur of controlled speed. He ran across the open plaza, the adaptive camouflage of his suit shifting to mimic the blood-stained duracrete beneath his feet. The few Vizian sentries left guarding the communications tower barely registered his presence before he was upon them. He didn't use his weapon. He used his hands. A precise strike to a Visian's cervical nerve cluster, a quick twist of a limb to disable another. He moved with the brutal efficiency of someone who had been trained for one purpose, to be a weapon. He reached the base of the tower and began his ascent, using grav clamps in his boots to scale the sheer metal face of the structure. He was a spider climbing a steel web, a dark speck against the toxic brown sky. Inside the spire, Director Vorlag watched Kaelen's ascent on a high magnification viewer, his gelatinous form quivering with a mixture of fury and something akin to scientific curiosity. This lone, armored figure was the source of all his problems. The anomaly. "Lock all available weapons on that target," Vorlag commanded. "I want it atomized." Automated defense turrets, hidden in the tower's superstructure, swiveled and opened fire. A storm of laser bolts and plasma rounds filled the air around Kaelen. He didn't try to dodge. He simply kept climbing, his suit's micro-shielding flaring and sparking as it absorbed and deflected the incoming fire. He was a man racing against time, and the energy bolts were nothing more than an inconvenient rain shower. He reached the broadcast emitter at the tower's peak with 30 seconds to spare. The shielding on his suit was failing, alarms screaming in his ears. He ignored them, pulling a small device from his belt, a data spike linked directly to the Nyx in orbit. He plunged it into the tower's primary access port. "Echo! Now!" He yelled into his comms, his voice strained. In orbit, the Nyx's AI, which had been patiently waiting, unleashed its payload. It wasn't a missile or a bomb. It was a flood of pure, unadulterated data. It bypassed all of the conglomerate's firewalls and encryption, using the amplified signal from the tower to hijack every single public and private comms channel in the entire star system, every news feed, every corporate data stream. Every ship-to-ship transmission was suddenly replaced by a live feed from Cygnus X1. But it wasn't the feed of the fighting. It was something far more damning. The Nyx began broadcasting the conglomerate's own internal archives, 30 years of them. The galaxy saw the footage of Terran families being rounded up after the collapse. They saw the cold clinical records of the recalibration process, the life and personality being methodically scrubbed from a person's mind. They heard the audio logs of xyloform supervisors callously discussing mortality rates in the chattel pens. They saw Director Vorlag himself, in a private log, referring to the Terrans as bipedal cattle, whose only value was in their cheap, efficient labor. Across the sector, 1,000 conversations stopped. A Visian freighter captain, hauling luxury goods, stared at his view screen in horror. A Cathar merchant, negotiating a trade deal, saw the primitive species his people had betrayed being systematically brutalized. In the corporate lounges of a dozen star systems, the conglomerate's business partners watched the meticulously crafted image of their benevolent enterprise burn to the ground in a matter of seconds. The broadcast was a virus of truth, and it was spreading at the speed of light. On Cygnus X1 Krelix, the Visian commander froze as the feed appeared on his tactical display. His superiors had told him this was a simple riot control mission. The images flickering before his eyes told a different story. This was slavery. This was genocide, repackaged with corporate buzzwords. His violet nervous system dimmed to a troubled, uncertain blue. His hesitation was a fatal one. The Terran rebels, seeing their history, their pain, broadcast for all to see, were filled with a new, righteous fury. They surged forward, breaking the Visian lines. The corporate enforcers, their morale shattered by the revelation of what they were truly defending, began to fall back. High atop the tower, his mission complete, Kaelen looked down at the turning tide. The shielding on his suit finally gave out, and a plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, sending him staggering. He grunted in pain, the smell of his own seared flesh filling his helmet. He had done it. He had turned a riot into a galactic incident. Before he could be hit again, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see the sleek, obsidian form of the Nyx descending through the clouds, its phase cloak disengaged for all the world to see. A Terran ship, a ghost made real. It hovered beside the tower, a cargo hatch opening. It was his ride home. He stumbled into the ship, collapsing on the deck as the hatch sealed behind him, the sounds of the battle fading. As the Nyx ascended, he looked at the planet below, a world now fully engulfed in the fires of revolution he had started. This was no longer just about Cygnus X1. He had put a crack in the foundation of the galactic conglomerate, and he knew, with a grim certainty, that the entire rotten structure would now be coming down on top of him. The galaxy had seen the truth. Now, it would be forced to choose a side. The automated medical suite on the Nyx was a sterile white cocoon, a stark contrast to the blood and chaos Kaelen had just left behind. Nanites swarmed in his shoulder, knitting together vaporized flesh and rebuilding the shattered bone with painstaking precision. The pain was a dull, persistent fire, a grounding sensation that kept him anchored to the reality of his choices. Through the medbay's transparent wall, he watched the star charts shift and swirl. He had won the battle for information, but the war for Cygnus X1 was about to become a slaughter. The galactic conglomerate was not an entity that tolerated dissent. It liquidated it. A damage report, a financial quarter was one thing. An entire planet of liberated assets broadcasting corporate atrocities to the galaxy was another. Retaliation would be swift, absolute, and designed to serve as a terrifying example to anyone else who might get similar ideas. Echo's silver avatar materialized beside the biobed, its form as calm and unreadable as ever. The broadcast was successful beyond our projections, the synthetic voice stated. The conglomerate's stock value has plummeted by 73%. 17 of their primary trade partners have frozen their contracts pending an investigation. The Vissian government has publicly condemned them and recalled all corporate security assets, including Krellix's forces. Kaelen grunted, a spasm of pain shooting through him as he tried to sit up. So they're crippled. Financially, yes, Echo corrected. Militarily, they are wounded and enraged. A corporate fleet has been diverted from the outer rim. Their orders are explicit asset liquidation. They will sterilize the entire planet. Kaelen, erase the debt, the evidence, and the rebellion in one clean, final transaction. They arrive in 10 hours. 10 hours. 10 hours until millions of his people, who had just tasted freedom for the first time, were silenced forever. The rage that simmered within him was cold and sharp. He had started this fire, and he would not let it be extinguished in a corporate firestorm. "Take us back," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Reclaimer, the Nyx is a stealth vessel, not a dreadnought," Echo cautioned. "We cannot engage a fleet of that size. Your mission was to liberate their minds. You have succeeded. Their minds are free, but their bodies are still in a cage, and the executioner is at the door." Kaelen shot back, pushing himself to his feet. the medical suite whining in protest. "My mission isn't over. We are not leaving them." As he limped toward the bridge, a priority message request flashed on his console. It was from the surface. It was Ilara. He accepted. And her face, smudged with grime and illuminated by the light of a burning factory, appeared before him. She looked exhausted, terrified, and more alive than he had ever seen her. "Kaelen," she began, her voice cutting through the static of a makeshift transmitter. "They are telling us a fleet is coming. The Visians are gone, but we have no weapons, no ships. We won the block, but we can't win the sky." She wasn't asking for a miracle. She was reporting the facts. The leader of a doomed revolution, her gaze unwavering. "We're not going to try to win the sky," Kaelen said, his own resolve hardening as he looked at her. "We're going to pull it down on top of them, barricade the main sectors, get your people to the lowest levels, into the maintenance tunnels. Make them dig for every life." She nodded, a flicker of understanding, of trust, in her eyes. "They learned how to fight today. We will not make it easy for them. Whatever you are planning, be fast." The transmission cut out. The conglomerate fleet arrived with the quiet, arrogant confidence of an apex predator. 12 cruisers and a flagship. The gilded balance sheet took up orbital positions, their forms blocking out the stars. They were sterile, functional vessels, designed for intimidation and overwhelming force. On the planet below, the Terrans, under Ilara's command, had vanished underground, turning their former prison into a fortress. The conglomerate's orbital bombardment began, not with planet-cracking warheads, but with precise, targeted energy lances that systematically vaporized the surface structures, turning the symbols of their oppression into glass and ash. It was a methodical, passionless extermination. From the cover of the gas giant's rings, Kaelen watched, the Nyx a silent, unseen witness. He was waiting. The fleet was focused on the planet, their sensors pointed downward, their arrogance providing him with the perfect cover. But he wasn't the only one watching. A violent tear in space-time ripped open a few thousand kilometers from the conglomerate fleet. Out of the swirling vortex of hyperspace came not the sleek lines of other Covenant ships, but the jagged, bone-white hulls of Cathar Dominion warships. At their head was a Scythe-class interceptor, its copper plating freshly polished. Prefect Valerius had found him. The quantum trail left by the Nyx's damaged phase drive had been faint, but Valerius's fanatical obsession had been enough to follow it across the galaxy. On the Cathar Bridge, Valerius's crimson scales bristled with righteous fury. He saw the conglomerate fleet bombarding the planet, and he saw, on his deep-range scanners, the faint energy signature of the Terran ghost ship hiding in the rings. To him, this was a cesspool of heresy, corrupt merchants, and a resurrected abomination. He would purify them all. "All ships," Valerius snarled, "target the Terran vessel. Then we shall deal with these corporate filth." For the glory of the Dominion, the Cathar ship surged forward, a wave of zealotry and plasma. The conglomerate fleet, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to reorient their weapons. The orderly execution was shattered, replaced by a chaotic, three-way dance of death. This was the moment Kaelen had been waiting for. With both his enemies now engaged with each other, he pushed the Nyx from the cover of the rings. But he didn't attack the warships. He went for the head. He activated the phase drive and shot directly toward Cygnus X-1, diving into the upper atmosphere, right through the heart of the orbital bombardment. Alarm screamed on the gilded balance sheet's bridge. The Terran ship was ignoring the battle entirely. "Where is he going?" the conglomerate admiral demanded. Kaelen descended upon the spire, the gleaming administrative tower where Director Vorlog was overseeing the planetary sterilization. He didn't fire a single weapon. Instead, he brought the Nyx to a hover directly over the spire's roof and deployed the chrono anchor. The swirling sphere of captured space-time, the device he had risked everything for, pulsed with an incredible energy. Echo's voice filled the bridge, calm amidst the chaos. "The anchor is not a weapon, Reclaimer. It is a key. It stabilizes causality, allowing for a single, focused transmission not through space, but through the quantum foam that underlies it. The signal has been sent." As if in answer, new contacts began appearing on the system's edge, one at first, then 3, then a dozen. They were Terran ships, phasing into reality from every direction. The Nyx was not alone. The Silent Covenant was silent no more. The ships were a varied lot, sleek recon vessels like the Nyx, heavily armed cruisers forged in secret, even retrofitted colony ships bristling with hidden weapons. They were the scattered children of Earth, summoned by the key that was the anchor and the call that was the broadcast from Cygnus X1. The new Terran fleet engaged, their advanced technology and unpredictable tactics sowing chaos among the already embattled conglomerate and Cathar forces. On the planet's surface, Director Vorlag watched the sky fill with his worst nightmare. His fleet was in disarray, and a Terran warship was parked on his doorstep. He ordered the spire's potent anti-orbital defenses to fire, but it was too late. Kaelen had one last trick. He activated the grav shear, not as a weapon, but as a surgical tool. A focused microsingularity formed at the base of the spire, not destroying it, but severing its connection to the planetary power grid and its foundations. The entire colossal structure shuddered, lifted a few feet into the air, and then, with agonizing slowness, began to topple, a monument to corporate greed collapsing under its own weight. The battle in orbit turned, the conglomerate fleet, leaderless and outmaneuvered, broke formation and attempted to flee. The Cathar, caught between two fires and having sustained heavy losses, retreated back into hyperspace. Valerius's final transmission, a vow of eternal vengeance. The sky over Cygnus X1 fell silent, filled now only with the quiet, purposeful movements of Terran ships. Kaelen landed the Nyx in the ruins of the central plaza where the rebellion had begun. The hatch opened, and he stepped out, his shoulder still aching, but his spirit alight. Ilara and a crowd of thousands were there, their faces turned upward, tears streaming down their faces as they watched the ships of their people, the stuff of myths and legends, securing their world. He walked toward Ilara, the lone ghost now standing in the light. "You told me a story," he said, his voice raw, unfiltered by his helmet, "about a people who remembered they had fire in their hearts." Ilara looked from him to the ships in the sky, a smile spreading across her face. "And you," she replied, "are the one who brought the spark." Later, standing on the bridge of the Nyx and watching the first transports carry liberated Terrans to a new, secret colony world, Echo's avatar appeared one last time. "Our purpose was not revenge, Reclaimer," it said. It was redemption, not for our past failures, but for their future. You were sent to reclaim artifacts, But you have reclaimed our soul. Kaelen watched the faces of the children on the transport ship's viewer faces, full of hope, fear, and a future that was now theirs to write. The galaxy had tried to erase humanity, to turn them into a footnote in a history book written by their conquerors. Today, humanity had started a new chapter. The silence was broken, the ghosts were real, and they were never going back into the dark.